As Neuroscape begins to finish up its playtesting sessions, we had another tournament, and today I played Thrashers. So last week we were able to take down the entire tournament playing Corpo, specifically more of a mid-range controlling style game plan, and a good amount of the cards were nerfed, some of the stats were tweaked a little bit. And so going into today, I was shuffling between about 4 to 5 different decks, trying to figure out what I was going to play with a bunch of new patch notes, different card stats, and having absolutely no idea what was going on. However, I had gotten some testing games in throughout the week and saw that Cybernetics was doing extremely well. A lot of the context of this entire event and what I played was kind of warped around this deck existing. Synthetics is going to give everything now +2/+2 for each cyberware attached to them. Now, this is a very good scaling effect, and with 4 Cybernetic getting +3/+3, there are very good threats that this deck can put out, but they've always had the issue of being able to be removed off the table. If you are able to kill things that have gear on them, you're normally up on card advantage, just because if, let's say, bare minimum, one thing is attached, they invest 2 cards, you use 1 card to remove it, so you're always 2 for 1-ing. So part of the solution to this, which I think was a very good approach, was trying to figure out some way to give protection to these characters. That way, you're able to kind of build some game plan around them without just being at the mercy of whatever your opponent draws in terms of removal. Cloaking Field going down to 1, I think was a little too powerful, just specifically because of the play pattern that this enacts. So 1 cost for a cyberware, now your unit essentially has hexproof. So what really changed about the deck was now if you went second and you opened any hand that had a 1-drop in the cybernetic class, and there are a good amount because you have Virtual Boy, Lugnut, Scrapper, you also have Dumpster Diver. Any of these are perfectly fine. And if you go second, start with 2 RAM, you are able to play a 1-drop, and then immediately with the other RAM available, stick your Cloaking Field on it. And now because of the new mainframe buff, this is now a 3/3 with hexproof for the rest of the game. The main issue, unless if I'm missing something, is that there is not a whole lot of ways to actually remove the 1-drop if you are the player going first. With only 1 RAM available, there's really not a whole lot of options you have. I think really the only consistent one I was able to find in the card pool is only going to be in Corpo. And that's if you get to go first and you play a Seeker Drone, and then you hold this up, and then you're threatening to at least try to kill the 1/1. And there are plays around this, and you're committed to the play without ever seeing what your opponent's opening hand is going second. But this is like the only sort of hedge that you can have against your opponent sticking a 1-drop and then putting Cloaking immediately on it. So that warped a lot of it, and that even influenced my decision to play Thrashers for the day. Even though this was a Corpo card, I felt like Thrashers might have some way to consistently 2 or 3 for 1. That was mainly because of the removal package in it, so I needed to find a way to be able to answer like that opener that is almost unbeatable for a lot of decks. A lot of the Thrasher removal hadn't been touched by a lot of these recent tweaks to the card pool, so I felt like it was the main deck that had access to premium efficient removal that also had some ability to close games. Now, if I were to compare this to last week's Corpo deck, I do think that this deck is significantly worse. Something about Thrashers is there is an awkward anti-synergy because a lot of their cards end up sacking themselves, or you're playing for a lot of board control with, unfortunately, mainframes that require you to stick things on the field. When you couple that with the fact that there's not really a whole lot of good environments or permanent protocols in the deck, I think it's actually very hard to build synergy, and I don't think I ever hit 4 Thrashers once the entire day, and maybe that's okay. But I do feel like, compared to last week, if you were to play a good efficient deck with good removal and good endgame units, the previous Corpo deck definitely felt a lot better. But I wanted to try something new, explore a bit more territory, and I thought that this deck would also have a very good matchup into the Corpo deck, for instance, that we played last week, especially with the new nerfs, because cards like Beatdown and Death Metal take out the top end units and are insanely efficient. For instance, if they play a tank and you just pay 1 for a Beatdown, you've cleared their entire 5 costs and it only deals 3 to you. And then something like Death Metal being instant speed, 2 cost, delete anything, I think there may be some tweaking that needs to happen because I think that these are insanely efficient removals. When you consider that delete is twice the cost of Death Metal, yes, you do need the faction requirement, so that is like the inevitable trade-off between the two. But the point is, if you're able to stick a unit and your opponent doesn't have an immediate answer for it, you now have this entire arsenal opened up for insane removal spells. As we talked about last week, ramp is very good. So we're still playing a ramp package, just ways to get resources in the early game as you're building up. This means that you can start drawing cards more often in the late game. Stage Diver is still here, nerfed down to 1 damage. The card is still very good, and you're definitely happy to run this in the deck. Not only does it unlock your synergy, you can hold it open. Your opponent won't commit as many weak units to board early, so they'll actually play a bit slower if you just play a Stage Diver out. And that also means you're now opening up a lot of faction required removal cards. Skin Smasher is where the deck kind of takes a nosedive, I think. Like, this card is pretty good, but a 3/2 that only buffs other units in a deck that is kind of playing mid-range is very difficult. I think if I were to revisit it, I have a maybe board down here. I think I'd probably include maybe Iron Maiden over it in this slot. I think Iron Maiden maybe does a little bit more for the deck. But we do get to play a pretty good card, in my opinion, with Nameless. This is just letting us destroy any target program once a turn for 3. So if you can play this down at 6, clear an environment, clear Trojan, clear something important that your opponent has in their protocol slot. The card just overall feels pretty good. I was even considering playing this in non-Thrasher decks. And then for our top end units, we have Jet Thorn. Jet Thorn's pretty solid, puts a decent clock on the opponent. I do think 3 health is a pretty significant downside though. But you can give it overrun, which I think is pretty solid. And depending on when you curve out with this, you can answer something that your opponent played on the previous turn, or you can threaten to remove something that they're going to play on your turn. And then we also have Vic Viper, just a good stat that's aggressive and can also hopefully clear the board a little bit, depending on where the game is at. After playing today, I was really low on this card, honestly, and if I were to include a 2 of to round out the deck, I would maybe consider Metalhead. Metalhead specifically, because not only is it a better top-end unit in my opinion, but it actually directly answers the Cybernetics deck to some degree. And then going into the rest of the deck, there's a lot of removal. Trample overall was pretty inefficient in my opinion, that it requires you to target a running character, and that definitely made it a lot worse after kind of realizing that. And I would maybe take a second look at this, but that's really only because of the Cybernetic deck, and to most other decks being able to destroy something for 1 that's tapped either to an ability or attacking, I think is perfectly fine. It was just really specifically because of the Synthetics deck. It would just, by the time that it would be attacking, it would well be on it, right? The base we're talking about here is 3 if it's not even equipped with the cloak, in which case you couldn't target it anyway. But if it was targetable, it's already out of that range now. Sand Scorpion, just another way to try to retaliate against these. I mean, it's good against the Synthetics deck, depending on what they curve out into and how explosive their opener is, but it's also just a good card in general. Doesn't let anything attack into it, but also can follow up on the board immediately. But then we get to the actual tech card for the event, and this was Bob. So Bob just let me have an answer to that play that we talked about earlier, just that 1 drop into Cloak. Bob, at least relatively close to on curve, can actually answer it. But the main problem with Bob is that it doesn't even fully answer it, because if they are able just to get it above that 4 power threshold by just equipping more gear onto whatever untargetable unit is, Bob misses the window to do it. So it's not even necessarily like the best answer. And there's a lot of instances where Bob either kind of clumps up in your hand, because it also deals 4 to you. So there were multiple times today where I actually had them in my hand, even the finals. So game 3 of the finals today, I ended up in the end game, I think with like 2 extra Bobs in my hand, just because I was so low on life, I couldn't actually activate it without killing myself in the process. And in one of my games in top 4, if I'd activated Bob, it would have killed my opponent, but it also would have killed me, and we would have had a draw. So it was really awkward, but it was the only way that this deck could actually answer that opener from Cybernetics within a reasonable time frame. I think without it, I probably would have lost all my Cybernetics games, and the only ones that I won were because of Bob specifically. And then when we go into our inventory, there's a couple things here. We have Redirect plus Garbage Day for still trying to play around those Mystic Lilith Reanimator decks. I ended up swapping out Firewall, which we included in our Corpo deck for this combo strategy for Redirect. Redirect can actually kill them in response rather than just walling you up, so it actually can be a win con rather than just stalling the game out even longer. It also doubles up into Corpo if, for instance, you were playing against a Corpo deck that was playing for a Maximilian combo. So specifically, when they would sack all their RAM to deal 20 to you, you could redirect it back at them. So it just seemed like a better tech piece in general. And then this was more for non-Thrasher decks, but specifically decks that were stalling and building up a large board state to kind of wall up. So we have Death Wish, where when any non-Thrasher character takes damage, you destroy them, coupled with Mosher. And so you could play the Death Wish and then play the Mosher, activate its ability, deal 1 to everything in play, and then pinging them all for 1 would in turn kill them. So that was the theory. You would side this in if game 2 you weren't playing against a Thrasher deck and it was a deck that played to very large board states. So it would be good against Synthetic, be good against Bees, even Corpo, right? Because they would play large units and then you would just ping them with Death Wish for 1 and then clear like a 6-drop or whatever. So that was the overall deck philosophy for this, was just very similar to last week, but trading off a little bit of ramp for more premium removal. So the deck felt very good in terms of that, but I do think the deck had some pretty significant flaws to me. So the number one thing was lack of mainframe synergy. Although I do think after deliberating a little bit and talking with the person who ended up winning the event, Berserker may have been better overall because this is a conditional +1/+1, but this is just a static +2, which can end up being better. Some moments today, the ability on Headbanger actually bailed me out a couple times, where I would use as a combat trick. My opponent would attack, I would remove one of their things, my other thing gets a +1 buff, and then I would end up blocking and then maybe trading or clearing their thing. So situationally, this was actually pretty beneficial, but I could see that just a static +2 might be better. But the main problem overall is this deck actually has issue ever reaching synergy, which is a problem. All my decks are basically one with Jet Thorn, giving overrun to it, which is trample, and then coming in for 9 was really the only way I was ever winning games in this deck. So I think overall the deck lacked the ability to close games very well. Jet Thorn needing to resolve a combat was always a liability. When you compare it to something like Tank, for instance, in Corpo, or Neosec being able to deal direct damage to the opponent, those are much easier win cons to enact rather than needing to interact with the combat step. But the trade-off is that Jet Thorn is actually very aggressively statted, and the turn you play it, you can still attack for 7. If you're clearing board ahead of time, and if you clear board on the reset or end step phase going into the turn where you have 5 resources, Jet Thorn's always going to connect for 7. So that is where the card is actually very powerful. But the other issue is that the good removal spells all require Thrasher to be online, but when you play cards like Stage Diver that require you to sack them, it becomes very awkward to kind of get this all in tandem. So overall, the deck performed well, but I am skeptical over how much of that is the deck's power level and how much of that is me playing my removal spells at optimal timing windows and my opponent getting blown out to them. I do think a lot of people played around certain cards very well, but I did notice every once in a while I would catch someone off guard with a really low costed removal spell in a very pivotal point in the game and completely flipping it on its head. Maybe that is just inherently powerful, but I do wonder how much of that would be mitigated with just more experience against a deck like this. But at the same time, 2 cost instant speed delete anything is very good. So Death Metal definitely was the overperformer in the deck. Jet Thorn was the win con. Everything else was trying to just clear and manage the board as best that it could. And even though this deck was trying to beat Cybernetics, we still lost in the finals in game 3 to the Synthetics deck. So it's maybe not entirely there to beat the deck. That's where we could talk about the things that we could side in for next time. But if you were interested in Thrashers, this could be a starting place for you if that's something that you're interested in. But until next time, thank you for watching.